So, sort of the latest thing in the US these days is talking about brain injury as a chronic disease. And what they mean by that is that we used to think that there was this horrible crash, a serious injury, person goes through acute care, person goes through rehab, person gets discharged from rehab, and then they have to fend for themselves. And their families have to fend with them. And for the most part, they should do okay. But it was not any concern of the medical profession. Now, this is more so in the United States, where you're covered by health insurance. You're not covered by an ACC or a similar sort of thing. You're covered by a health insurance. And the health insurance, your health insurance might say you're eligible for 42 days of rehab, and that's all. And then after that, you're really on your own. So just recently, to see just how serious the problem was, people have been looking at what's called the Model Systems Database. And without going into too much detail, what it means is that they can look at a large number of people who have had serious injury and follow them up later and see what were the outcomes. And so the data that I just recently looked at, and I didn't want to do slides and show you stuff, so you're just going to have to bear with me describing it. But it was they looked at 5 years post-injury for almost 14,000 individuals, so a very large database. And the first thing they noticed right off the bat that upset the reviewers, the researchers, was that 1 in 5 had died. So they left rehab and 1 in 5. Whew. That's way more than they expected. So the first set of questions that they followed up that response with was, what's causing death? Brain injury, once you leave the facility, remember, they're leaving the facility alive. They're not dying in ICU, and they die there too, but they're not counted in this study. This is a study of the people who were alive when they left the inpatient rehabilitation program, and 5 years later, 1 in 5 are dead. And most of those deaths, by the way, occurred in the first year. And what did they die of? Number one things were medical causes. Seizures, infections, and that sort of thing. And what that raises a concern about is, are people with brain injury getting adequate medical care after they leave the facility? And all of the evidence is suggesting the answer is no. Let's take, for example, difficulty getting to sleep. Difficulty getting to sleep is something in our research we saw almost everybody has. What are the causes of that? Well, the most common cause that we know about is actually essentially a medical one. Your autonomic nervous system is changed. So people see it as sort of their fault or a behavioral issue. I've got to get to bed. I've got to develop better habits, et cetera, et cetera. All that's true. That's the best way to deal with it. But it is a medical problem because the autonomic nervous system is wrong. When you go to lie down, your nervous system has to say, get you ready to sleep. And it does that in a variety of different ways, which I won't go into in great detail with you. Sorry. But it's getting you ready, but your body, because of your brain injury, just doesn't make that change. And that's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. And the only way to deal with it, like I said, is to have as best sleep habits or whatever, and that's what Eddie was saying. That is, make sure you go to bed at the same time every night. Don't drink coffee or tea for a few hours before. Alcohol is not a good idea. It may make you changes the quality of your sleep. Melatonin is the best thing of all, and it's a natural medicine. I find it interesting that in New Zealand, it's not something that you can get over the counter. You can get it by prescription, but in Canada, you can just walk into a drugstore and buy a bottle of melatonin. Melatonin is what your body produces when the dark comes. So darkness happens, and your body produces naturally melatonin. And God didn't say, what's the evidence for this? It is. So there's no question that it is and all you're doing when you're adding melatonin is you're doing what your body produces naturally anyway. It's much better than a medication, and it doesn't need evidence because that's what your body already produces. Whether more of it helps is another matter. That's where maybe some evidence would come in. But you're not producing enough melatonin, partly due to the fact that your body is not slipping into that sleep state like it should. So the bottom line from this first part of this study is that it looks like people with brain injury are not getting access to adequate medical care for ongoing medical problems once they leave their inpatient rehab. That's in the United States. Does this all apply to New Zealand? I will leave that to you to tell me. No one has done the follow-up study in New Zealand to say how many people have died after they leave rehab and what are the rates. But I'm going to tell you it's probably pretty similar. So let me move on though. What are the other causes? The other big area of causes is behavioral. Suicide and drug and alcohol issues that are, they call it self-poisoning, basically. That's what it is. So that's the other big area. And again, are there services? See, in the United States, when you leave an inpatient rehabilitation, it's like coming off a cliff. There's nothing in terms of follow-up, really. And general practitioner, you go home, your family looks after you, and so on and so forth, and then you go to general practitioner. They think, okay, he's been through inpatient rehabilitation, now he's here. They don't realize there's continuing medical problems, particularly neuroendocrine problems, and that's related to the sleep and so on. So that's probably the number one that's overlooked is neuroendocrine problems, and so that's evident. Okay, so the other thing that was disturbing about these 5-year follow-ups was that at 5 years post-injury, for those who managed to stay alive, the outcome is not the way we had anticipated. It's not good. The outcome is roughly a third. A third of individuals are deteriorating from the time they leave rehab to when they're followed up. A third have no change at all. So there's no improvement, but no getting worse. And a third who get better. Now, I look at this data and I think, if a third can get better, why can't it be 2/3? I mean, if everybody gets worse, and we say, okay, well, it's sort of built into the brain injury that you're just going to get worse with time. But if a third get better, that's not true. So why would a third get better and a third get worse and then another third didn't improve at all? Now, I worked only in post-acute rehab, and that's where all of my experience was. And I have to be honest with you, everybody that came into our post-acute program got better. So we're in the third that got better category, I am sure. I am absolutely convinced of that because I watched and saw individuals who improved way beyond anyone's expectations. And frankly, I've met some of you and think you are good examples of having gone way beyond expectations. So I may be talking to the third that did better. I don't know, but I'm guessing that. I'm more concerned about the third that don't do well at all. And maybe you can give me some of your thoughts in a few minutes. Let me tell you a little bit more about the data, and then I'll stop. The thing that predicted the third that get better, the number one thing to predict that was discharge to their family. And it's kind of interesting because if you ask healthcare professionals, they would never have predicted that. Healthcare professionals almost seem to think that it might even be a negative predictor because but they're more likely to see individuals come back into the system whose families can't handle it. And so they have a sort of the term we use is jaundiced, but an inaccurate perception of families and what they can do. I've seen how incredibly powerful and effective families can be, and I have studied that and published on that, but I've seen the range. But there's still some families that don't succeed, and they don't do well. So I guess I just throw out a question to you. Does this information surprise you? Does it worry you? It worries me, so I'm just curious, does it worry you? I think that the notion of discharge to family care, to the family, that's a great thing, and I clearly would support that. But it shouldn't be without some resources. I think one of them is really important to give families some education and training. And I don't quite like the word training as much as because I'm not sure it's like formal education kind of training, but the kind of thing that Eddie was doing and describing ways of coping and so on and so forth. That's just extremely helpful. In one study that we did, I was comparing our post-acute program, which was very well funded, and we really put a lot of time and effort into our training, and I would hold it up as a standard for post-acute programs anywhere. It was really very good. And I had a sample of people that had just gone to their families because their families chose that as opposed to the person going into post-acute and then going to their family. And I compared the two in terms of outcomes. And I have to be honest with you, I really thought that we would end up looking like the most wonderful place on earth, and that the individuals going back to their families would not do nearly as well. And that didn't turn out to be the case at all. In terms of community integration, something that I believe is really what we're all about, and I'd be more than happy to clarify that if anybody wants it. In terms of community integration, people who went to their own families actually did better. And that really surprised me until I sort of investigated it further and realized, okay, so they go to their own family, they're also going to their own community where everybody kind of knows them and cares about them. And so, my friend Michael, I described, he was injured. We live in a small town. Michael can go anywhere in that town and everybody knows Michael. And if Michael's in a little bit of trouble, they know to call his mom or call, So there's a kind of a community looking after him. He's integrated as all get out. He knows everybody, he goes everywhere. So the community allows for that because it's the community he originally came from. When they come to us at our rehab program and they're going into the community, they're going into a strange community. So to some extent, the family had an advantage over us, and it showed up in the data, and bully to them. So the second thing I looked at was dealing with behavior problems. As the person leaves the facility and they have a range of behavior problems, can the family cope with that? And we had I mean, I train my staff to be really good at dealing with behavior and da-da-da-da. And the family did nearly as well as we did without training. So what they were doing, I don't know, but again, I could only walk away from that saying, good credit to you. Now that was without training. Can you imagine what would they do if they had training? When it came to cognitive gains, that's the one place where they couldn't compete. We did much better with having people improve their memory and so on and so forth. And we were really structured in trying to do that and so on. So when I look at that, it's not like I say, okay, you do better if you go to program X than you do if you go to the family. I think it isn't one or the other, because these were families that chose. So they're going to be your families that have probably the best support network anyway. Rather, it's wherever you go, you should have access to well-trained people to provide useful, meaningful support that is dignifying and effective. And so that means if they go to a post-acute program, let me back up a little bit. In the US, because of their insurance structure, the access to post-acute programs is minimal. It's only if you got hurted in a car crash where there's a lawsuit and you can get some money that you're going to get that, or you have wealthy parents who are willing to spend their life savings, or some other rare circumstances. But here, your chances of getting post-acute programs are much, much better because of the ACC and the respect that the people as a whole have for providing the full range of services. So that's a positive. That assumes that they know what they're doing in the post-acute program and that they have training, that it's going to be useful. As for support for families, you also have much greater access to support for families here. You can complain, and I hear lots of complaints, but the truth is if you compare what families have access to here through ACC to anything that exists, say, for example, in the United States, you're way ahead. Is it the best help? Is it the best organized sort of help? I think that's worthy of discussion. I don't know that it is. I've had families attend. This past week, I've just done the level 1 training that I do. And are you all familiar with what we do or with what that is? I offer a 4-day course that is mostly attended by, I would say, the vast majority are occupational therapists. I'd say the next biggest group is ACC case managers. And then I get other healthcare professionals. And sometimes I get family members, and sometimes I get people with brain injury. The more you know about brain injury, the more you know about what's happened to you and why it's happening to you and what your behaviors are. The more your family knows, the more everybody around you knows, the better the chance you are to come up with better solutions. One thing that's of interest to me and that I've done research on is empathy. And empathy means if you express unhappiness and I'm in the room, I should feel that and understand what you're feeling. And we take for granted that we will experience that because that's unless you're in that really small category like autistic or something like that, you should grow up naturally feeling empathy. But I've done research on this, and I think it's about 1 in 5 individuals basically lose the capacity for empathy because of the type of injury that they have. It's not their fault, but the area of the brain that deals with empathy has been damaged. Now, others maybe lean that way or whatever, but there's going to be some that are just clearly unable to experience empathy. And those individuals do not end up staying with their families. And you know, it was interesting, and I never published this research, partly for a variety of reasons. I can't always publish everything I've done. I'm doing the best I can, but sometimes my data overwhelms me and my colleagues. But I point that out to you because one of the things that I learned from doing that, or at least concluded from doing that, is, my gosh, some families who don't take their family member back or can't continue to provide the love and support to their family in their home and so on and so forth. I've always felt a certain level of criticism, maybe more subjective, more unconscious criticism, but still a sense that they're failing their son or daughter. But you think about it, we need something coming back too. And empathy is almost an essential element. Well, it is an essential element of human interaction. If I'm caring for a child, or if I'm caring for my adult son or daughter, and there's no return, nothing that ever comes back, I think you wear out. And that's what I think is going on there. And I thought that for me was really enlightening. So those individuals don't end up with their family. And I see it in my studies now. We always say to somebody when we're interviewing them, who knows the most about you? Who would be the person that I should go to ask about you? Who would that be? And typically it would be a spouse or a sister or a brother or a mother but when it's a professional staff person, that's usually the person who doesn't experience empathy. Now the only person that they can go to is somebody who's paid to be with them. And that was really enlightening to me. I don't know if that's something you find kind of interesting.